Blind Nil Audio.
I'm Alex L.
I'm Libby Delana. Welcome
to This Morning Walk podcast.
Hello, Katy. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm well. This is such a thrill. I think your work is really powerful and important, so I'm super happy to talk to you.
Likewise. Like a podcast all about walking, two hearts connecting over this medium. I'm very excited to chat with you.
It's super, super lovely. So we just realized we're both on the West Coast. So actually in the same time zone, which is a little unusual. Did you go out for a walk this morning?
Always.
Where'd you go?
It's really hot here, unnaturally hot for us.
Yeah.
And so I have been going by myself, which is unnatural for me. Usually I meet up with friends, but there's just been circumstances in my life which has made that challenging. So I get up early and I've been walking over to a local school, school grounds that's closed because it's in the summertime. And I found this hill in the shade where I then would just lay out and do some stretches and do some strength exercises and then walk myself back home. No music, no nothing, just to use all this massive green space and walk all over this green space that is, these public spaces, but no one's in them right now.
And it almost feels like it's the most important self-care thing we can do, right? I mean, to have that time, that quiet, that green, lush space, especially in the middle of summer when it's hot, it's like the most nourishing thing we can do.
Yeah. And for me, doing it in the morning is really essential. There's scheduling things, but I feel like I'm centered and my nervous system is particularly regulated. So it doesn't matter what comes up the rest of the day. But if I don't do it first thing, then I get the same physical benefits, it coming later. But I feel there's like a resentment I have towards the world that I project on anything that happens when it's really just,
So
you didn't
true.
for your walk. And so it's a true resentment for me, true anger almost for me when I don't do it.
Oh, I so hear you. I remember saying to my kids when I first started this practice was, don't talk to me until I've gone for my walk. Whatever I say, don't take it for gospel because it's probably better suited until I've come home after my walk. So Walk Stars, this is Katy Bowman. She has an incredible body of knowledge about our bodies and nourishing our bodies. So can you share with us your concept of the movement diet? I feel as if it's such an important way to think about how we're nourishing our bodies. I use that language, nourishing, all the time, but I don't think of it the way you articulate it, which is so beautiful, that we think about nourishing our body from a food perspective, and that's a natural way to think about it. But you talk about the movement diet, the way we move, and the macronutrients and the calories that we sort of ingest in the world of movement. Can you tell us about that? Walk us through who you are and how we got to this concept.
Well, thank you for the introduction. My name is Katy Bowman, and I'm a biomechanist. So that's a particular field of study, biology, living systems, mechanics are the way living systems respond to physical forces, pressures, being influenced by loads is an easiest way to say it. And I study the way our body of movement, I'll call it movement diet here coming up, but the way we've moved our bodies throughout a lifetime affects the physical experience we are having in these bodies right now. And I work on the tissue level. Like I do like to get into the nitty gritty of joints and bones and different tissue types. That's my field of training, but I've really tried to pan out to show people the way movement works in daily life. I think that we tend to think about movement as exercise. I'm getting exercise,
right?
Rather than looking at it as almost the axis to our human experience. Movement. I definitely am heavily informed from an evolutionary biology model. So there are loads and experiences the human body evolved underneath. And while those conditions are quite different recently, relatively speaking, time-wise, our needs, our physical needs are still the same. We still need a lot of these movements, even though our culture has really gotten rid of the need for movement to survive or function in the culture. Our physiology and our anatomy still depend on this type of movement to feed it. We can talk how we can get granular on that. But so that's what I study and what I'm interested in. And a movement diet is trying to capitalize on the framework that we have about nutrition. So I do think people would be like, oh, yes, I am nourished by that walk. I am nourished when I expend some energy physically. I sleep better. My mind is more calm or more clear. My legs hurt less. My shoulders or my back feel better. I mean, hopefully everyone listening has some sort of statement that they can relate to as far as all that goes. But where we are with understanding movement science is sort of where we were with understanding nutritional science 500 years ago. So
wow.
It was moving calorie. It's just like, just eat enough. Don't starve to death. Right? Yeah. Don't starve to death. But through the trial and error, there was these pockets of people living these natural experiments. And it's like, oh, it turns out that just getting enough food will not nourish you fully. There are predictable ailments that arise in populations that are missing certain micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals, we call them now, because we've identified them as essential compounds that the human body requires. Or macros. There are cultures or people on the planet who actually have adequate calories, but they come from maybe a lot of mangoes or a lot of sweet potatoes and avocados. They have plenty of fats. They have plenty of carbohydrates. They have plenty of calories. They don't have enough protein, and there's disease that arise in that situation. So this idea that there's a relativity around what we consume, we understand that food-wise. The same goes for movement. And the reason I bring that framework forward is because of the people who will say, I've always been active, but why is this hurting? Or I work physically. I do physical labor. I'm doing all, my steps per day is through the roof. And yet I'm experiencing this particular issue over here. And so it's just my way of saying, well, here's how movement works on the granular level. And we can sort out how you're moving throughout a day, a week, a lifetime. And you can start to see why certain areas of bone decrease in density, why certain muscles, why everyone's going to physio for sort of the same group of muscles. Like why is rotator cuff on the tip of so many folks' tongues? So it's explaining, well, we don't use it in our daily movement diet, and here's what to do about that.
Oh, that's so beautifully said. And that framework is very understandable. So to apply it to the world of movement makes extraordinary sense. So here's a question. For all of us walkers, and how would you recommend potentially adding a little something? So we want to make sure that we get all the macronutrients, all the micronutrients, and make sure that the way we're moving our body when we walk addresses all those things. Are there some things as we walk that we can do in terms of a gesture or a pause and to fulfill that whole sort of ecosystem? I mean, to be perfectly honest, I go out for a walk. I walk a lot. And I don't really add in much else. And as you're talking about it, I'm thinking, gosh, if I just paused at mile 1 and did a few other gestures along the way and did that every day, I'm sure it would have a profound impact. Can you recommend a few things that all of us walk stars can do to sort of broaden our well-being and not sort of diminish the amount of muscles that we're using? I use the same muscles over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. I'm listening to you. I think I need to extend and broaden into some other areas.
Well, so I'll answer that question in two parts. One is, what would walkers want to think about as far as macronutrients? And then what do walkers think about in terms of micronutrients? And so Beautiful. Macronutrients for walkers would be, what am I doing when I'm not walking to support the ability to walk for longer, feeling more balanced and feeling strong? And then micronutrients could be, what are some adjustments I could make to the alignment or form with which I am walking, or the terrain which I'm walking, that would that would increase the nutrient density of that bout of walking.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start with the macros. So envision a food pyramid, like your government food pyramid. And we can argue about what's actually on the pyramid, but we'll start with the idea that the pyramid itself is sound. The base of the pyramid are things that you need a lot of. The peak of the pyramid is sort of the things that you need trace amounts of.
Yeah.
Beautiful. The good news for walkers is walking, as far as human shapes go, human species shapes go, is really close to the base. The actual base is active rest positioning. So that would be the idea that when you are taking rest, when you are being in place, whether you're recording a podcast or watching Netflix or standing and for work, whatever, imagine this in-place activity, that it's not in a chair in exactly that same classic chair shape, 90 degrees at the hips, 90 degrees at the knees, 90 degrees at the ankles. So most of us listening in this culture really use the chair shape heavily. And then we do lots of walking, but we're really adapted to the chair shape. And that chair shape is leaving baggage and residue in our body that we're not getting all the way out of the chair when we walk, is another way of saying it. You've left the chair, but residuals in terms of muscle lengths and tensions and strength from so much of sitting showing up in our gait pattern.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But right above active rest positioning is walking. So you're getting this big category. But the other categories you want to consider are carrying, which you could also do while walking. So that's something that can be layered in. Humans rarely did any empty arm walking.
Okay.
I know. You want to pause there a second and unpack that?
Yes.
Right. So, go ahead.
No. Say more.
So walking is very much, it's foundational. It's definitional almost, bipedal.
Right.
But empty arm walking is not really a thing. And so if we look at modern hunter-gatherers who are arguably not exactly the same, but really have quite similar behaviors in terms of, if you're subsisting, if you're building your shelters and you're moving, these are people who live on the planet right now. You're carrying something with you when you walk, whether it's children, wood, water, right? Everything's very practical. Everything is purposeful. There's not really taking a walk just to clear your mind. It's transportation.
Yes.
You're carrying your gear with you. You're carrying your food with you. Right now.
It's functional.
It's functional. Our arms, what our arms are doing now is being done by our cars and our homes and closets and storage, right? And so we just leave empty armed and go out for a nice walk. So carrying is something that an easy way to layer in, and that could be adding a backpack. Carrying would be like adding any sort of weight to the frame of the body. Backpack is easy, but when we get to micronutrients, there's a difference between throwing a backpack on the same backpack in the same way, or carrying it on one shoulder, then the other shoulder, or carrying a bag that dangles from your hands, grocery bags, a bag of books from the library, where you're using grip strength now, you're using more core balance because it's on one side. So carrying is another macro. Other macros are making movements. So that would be harder to get in with your walking, although I will say that a big way that I keep my hands swelling from long walks, I'm a long distance walker, is by doing cordage. Taking grasses and sort of weaving and folding grasses, and that helps the water not pool, your fluids not pool down to your hands if they're getting swollen. So if you're active, holding and doing things with your hands, that's a good tip.
That's a good thing. Yeah, I just walk with my hands over my head, but that's much nicer folding and weaving grasses.
Yeah, that's right. It's like a fidget spinner. It's sort of like, the modern day fidget. And so I have a friend who knits when she walks.
Oh, I do that too. I put the ball of yarn in my pocket.
Yeah. So that's a way of making movements and layering it into walking. Yeah. What walkers are often missing are big body movements, and those would be strength building movements. And, for those moving into perimenopause and menopause, that hierarchy definitely increases. But I too, like I talked about at the beginning, like I'll go out and I'll walk to some place where I can get some of that done. I'll put it on the loop of my walk past a playground and, get a few monkey bar crosses or a few pull-ups or a few squats, a few push-ups on the park benches that you go by, those empty picnic tables. And
perfect.
Right? You don't actually have to, you're not walking when you do it, but you can put it within the path of your walk.
Yes. No, that's so great. What I hear you saying, just to review, is as we're moving, quite honestly, it's sort of weave into your path the opportunity to do some of those big movements.
Yeah.
The other thing I hear you say is potentially walk on surfaces that allow you to move your body, and not just the same rhythmic one foot in front of the other kind of slightly mindless, which I do a lot of, but walking on trails, you're hopping on rocks or you're hopping over a stream. Those little movements are also really important. And so I think, and then carrying weight, which I've just started doing. And I would say as a menopausal woman, that addition of weight, I feel is probably a really powerful thing to do, which I hadn't been doing up until now. But those are all three of those are really straightforward. And I'll say easy, meaning that it doesn't require new gear. It doesn't require a membership into anything. As you're walking, find a park bench, do some sit-ups, stand-ups. I think all those references are within a simple walk and can really have a profound effect. Here's a question for you. I often get a lot of questions about how to prevent injury, and I'm not sure. In terms of our walking community, the one I hear the most about is plantar fasciitis. And I'm not sure if that's from walking. Can you share a little bit about what you would recommend or know about that? I don't know much about it.
Well, I wrote 2 books on foot pain.
Oh, so there we go.
So yeah, the foot is definitely an entry point to this larger body of work, unintended. And so that puts us partly in the micronutrient category. So we haven't talked about form yet. So if your movement diet consists solely of walking, then you're going to be missing out on balancing out perhaps the loads to the feet. There's a lot of repetitive use that comes. Yes. Now, it's not necessarily from walking, but it is from maybe the way walking is relating to all the other movements that you do or don't do in your movement diet. Mm-hmm. As far as macros go, and as far as micros, it could have a lot to do with your form, the way, so I'm a biomechanist, which I've already said, and gait analysis is my passion, helping folks recognize here's how you are executing ambulation, getting from point A to point B, locomotion. We're able to succeed. We call it a success if, I walked from point A to point B, but there's a lot of different paths in between those 2 points, and they use our tissues differently. And our anatomy really implies directions of pull, loading on bones that are bigger, like landing on your large calcaneus versus taking all your steps where you're landing more in the midfoot or the smaller bones of the front of the foot. There's how you are strength-wise. I mean, we talked a little bit about big body work. You can walk quite a bit and still be getting weaker over time. And so your skeleton is sort of collapsing and being held by these certain areas. There's pressures that arise in these certain areas in the plantar fascia because of where it is. That's not the only issue of the foot. There are some big ones, and that's probably the biggest one that shows up for people, is learning how to carry your frame in a way that's better aligned so that you're leveraging your own musculature, the strengths of your skeleton and these connective tissues and these ligaments and tendons and bones in a more sustainable way. So that's why walkers also want to not only look at their macros, but their micros. Like, what is my walking form? For many people, they've never thought about their walking form. Yeah. They didn't even know there was an option of there's multiple ways that you can propel a walk, and how are you doing it? And you're heavily informed by how your parents walked and the people around you. Like, you've picked up those gait patterns if you have never spent time in training, or, if you've done ballet, or if you've But in the military, you were taught a way of physically conducting yourself, and all of that is going into this big bag that is your gait pattern.
And how do we look at our gait pattern? How would we assess our own and therefore make adjustments or changes to improve our gait?
Well, that's what I spend a lot of time writing is what do you start looking for? So I'll just give a few things that you can look out for. One is foot position. I'll start from the ground up. What direction do your feet point when you're walking? Are they pointing in the same direction, or is one more turned out than the other? None of these things are really arbitrary. We all are informed by our genetics, the anthropometric dimensions we come with. Yeah. But I would say there's even a greater influence in how we've used ourselves. So there's always anomalies, there's always disability, there's always injury, but there's also lots to do to mitigate or reduce the impact that those have on our gait. There are ways of optimizing, correcting some of these patterns to get better push off, to not always hit that sore spot on your knee when you're going downhill. There are indications of so looking at your foot position, looking at your overall alignment from the side. If you had someone film you from the side, are you leaning forward when you're walking? Are your hips way out in front of you when you're walking? Do you twist your hips when you walk, or do they present more or less forward? Do you kick one leg out to the side when you're walking? You can also use your ears. Are my feet dragging? Are my feet landing very heavily? These are all ways that we start to tune in, just to how you're walking. Very much like meditation, they'll say, before you change anything, pay attention to how you are breathing. Aware. Yes. So before you even change anything about your gait, just start becoming aware that you have a pattern and see if you can identify some of the things in it. That's always the first step.
Oh, I love that. And I had a friend who once said, I'd love your thoughts, which is a really interesting place to learn about your gait or your foot pattern is to walk in sand and then go back and look at the pressure points, or get your feet wet and watch and then make trail and look at, are your feet, do they look the same? Do the patterns look the same? Or is there some place where maybe you're putting more effort or more pressure? Is that a good place to begin to learn about your gait?
You can certainly see many things. I'll do things with folks where I have them, dip their feet in paint, and stand, and then people can guess each other's footprints. See if you can find your footprints. You can see high arches, low arches. You can't really see pressure. You can see pressure points in as much as this is where their foot is making contact. When you go to sand, you can see depth. So you can see more like, oh, not only is my foot making contact here, it's really digging down deep. The one challenge of using sand is not usually a uniform surface to start with. So if it's sloped,
good point.
Or if, so it wouldn't be as precise, but certainly you can go for a walk and turn around and look at your footprints and be like, this is what my feet are doing in the sand. But what they need to do in the sand is, sand walking is different than overground walking. So you might have different strategies. Just like I wouldn't want to look at your footprints in the snow or your footprints on ice and make a determination. I wouldn't make a big assumption about how you're walking on your local path in the spring based on how you're adjusting your gait pattern to deal with slipperiness or something with a deeper unstable push off like sand or snow. Right. Definitely information about how you walk in those mediums, but not how you're walking full stop.
Overall. Yeah, no, good point. I seem to remember a video I saw of yours, which talked very much about après walk, how to take care of your feet after you're walking, whether it's rolling on a tennis ball, can you say a little, we hear a lot about après other sports, what we can do after. I think it's the same with walking.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm not that big of a skier. Like, does après ski also happen in like the midpoint of the day, or is it really just?
I don't know. It's a good question. Yeah. Right. Don't know.
Yes. So for me, and of course it depends on the walk. What I would do for my feet after a 3 or 5 mile walk is going to be different than what I do for my feet after a 20 or 30 mile walk.
Right.
But foot care, your feet are like, they are the tools of this thing you're doing. So in the same
Yes.
way that you
Yes.
clean your computer screen, you wipe off your gardening tools, you polish,
Beautiful.
you change the oil on these tools. We don't really have that same um, relationship with our body in recognizing that this is a tool, and this is a tool that
Yes.
breaks down over time.
Right.
And
Right.
so for me, there's a stretching protocol that I have. That I put, I mean, that's what a lot of my books are about. Like, here's how to take
Yes.
care of your feet.
Yes.
So some of it is rolling on a ball, something that sculpts or molds. So you're using your foot in a slightly different way. Um, but not just my feet. It's walking is equally about the hips
Mm,
and the
mm-hmm.
glute muscles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people, those are not participating, which is why
Right.
the feet and the knees are doing so much work, because walking is not very well distributed over our body because of the way we walk, not the walking itself, because of our gait pattern is sort of, um, I like to refer back to that chair baggage.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
high amounts of we sitting are really informing this pattern that modern bodies are using for walking. There's not enough hip and glute, but I will do lots of hip stretches and glute stretches that really stretch out from the sole of my foot to my hip. So I'm taking
Is
this
that sitting
really,
down? You sit down and do that? Or
I lie on
I
my
lie
back. I
down.
get down to the
Okay.
ground
Yeah.
and I'll,
Okay.
strap up my foot
Yeah.
and I'll pull my foot towards me, which gives a calf stretch, and I'll straighten my knee, which a lot of people
Okay.
don't do. And then I'll pull it across the body to get the whole IT band. So you're getting all the way down the outside of that thigh from the plantar fascia, because you're pulling the toes back through the calf, hamstring, outside hip, IT band, all with one. And then I'll go to the other direction, out to the side
So
as well.
you're sitting on the ground. You have a strap that you
Lying,
loop around
lying back.
lined
Yeah.
that you loop around your toe. You pull your toe back to you with this strap, and then you allow the leg to go across the opposite side of your body.
Yes.
I mean, just thinking about that feels great.
It's great. You feel all in the back of your eyeball. You know what I mean? Like it just really
Yes.
pulls everything back out. So that's a big one. Also, our feet, when we get tired and we've walked a lot, there's an alignment to our whole body. So often the upper back and the lower back need
Yeah.
care. So
Yes.
there's definitely a debriefing of the entire body after going through a walk. And then I'll also do a like massage, usually with some sort of moisturizer. I tend to walk in. I'm a minimal shoe wearer, so I will walk lots of miles in gait sandals, walking sandals. And so my feet have been out in the elements. And so I always will do a moisturizing
Love that.
massage combination.
Beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, so that's part of it too.
Yeah, I love that. You have a new workbook that just came out. Can you tell us about your workbook? It's beautiful. And so there's so much in it. It's so dense. I find I read a little bit and then I integrate it, understand it. Tell us about it.
My perfect movement plan, because I've written many books, like 10, on different parts of the body and different aspects of life. But I wanted a place to synthesize this idea of movement nutrition to make it really digestible for folks who are just coming to it. What are movement calories, movement micros, and movement macros? And more importantly, what does my movement diet look like?
Yes.
Given this framework.
What's missing? Yeah.
So it's a workbook, and you are filling it out for you're plotting out your macros and your micros, but more importantly, you're looking at the way your macros and micros are showing up in the domains of your life. So the domains of your life are sleep, leisure, occupation, transportation, and home. Everything that you do in life is going to be sorted into those 5 categories for everybody, or sloth. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you're doing is you're looking to see, I'm helping people try to see the way they're moving better.
Yes.
I started with gait analysis and, show people like, look, your knee goes this way when you land, and when you go upstairs or go downstairs, your knee's dropping on this angle and your shoulder drops in this way. And that's a big part of why your body is feeling and working the way it is. This is similar, only it's to look at your day and say, where is your movement within a day happening? And And then more specifically, which domains are very sedentary for you and which domains are very active. With nutrition, remember, you can have too much of a good thing.
Yes.
Like you
Yeah.
can have like something that's nutritious and is food wise. Does not make an entire diet. You can take the most nutritious food and not eat it exclusively. You'll still be ill. And so we've gotten ourselves in this position where our understanding of movement has really been reduced to this concept of exercise. The amount of time we're told it needs to be is fairly small because there's so many people not even getting to that. And so we're losing understanding of, or we're not communicating properly. Here's how movement actually works. Here's why it needs to be distributed throughout the day. Here's why it needs to be distributed throughout the body. And then helping people once they see, their current movement diet to be like, okay, well, what's a meal plan now for you as far as movement goes? What's a grocery shopping list for you movement wise? And then most importantly, the part that I love most about the book is none of the reasons of doing this matter unless you've identified your movement why. You have to know what your movement why is, because if you're trying to organize your life around movement, or it could be sleep, or it could be meditation, or it could be better, anything that you perceive as better for your health. Better for your health is just not a long time motivator for many people because it's easily usurpable by other things that come up in life.
Right. Yeah. Well, I have to say, when I read Sloth, and just to repeat that for everybody, it's sleep, leisure, occupation, transportation, and home. I'm a systems person. And so when I read that, I thought, oh, that's actually a wonderful kind of rubric or checklist to get to the end of the day and think about each of those categories. And back to your point, the why, and just kind of do an audit of how have my movements sort of satisfied each of those categories. And so I found that tool to be really powerfully, really helpful. The other thing you talk a lot about, which I think is really, really important, is how we're very sedentary in our lives at this point in general. And we are also not very well rested. It's this very odd dynamic that culturally we spend a lot of time very sedentary and not a lot of movement. Our movement, diet is inadequate, and yet we're not rested. Can you talk about that a little bit? How do you reconcile these two? How do you understand them? How do you look at each of those things with a critical eye?
Yeah, that's really important to me. And that's something I've never put in a book before, but I put into this movement plan because it is very confusing where you're thinking, I physically have not or I should say it this way. The barrier that many people will say to moving more is energy. I am so exhausted. I'm exhausted. Right. So I can't muster the willpower or the decision to do this more active thing, and I'm going to do this less active version of a thing because I just don't have the physical capacity for it.
Right.
And that's totally understandable. I've been in that space and I understand that space. The tricky thing is I don't think our language around fatigue and being tired is very specific. It's more like a feeling that we have. It's malaise. It could be just low energy. There's a lot of different words to say the same thing, but lethargy, it's this feeling of I just can't. But then if you check in to be like, well, I haven't done anything physical enough to warrant this level of what I perceive as physical exhaustion.
Yes.
So what's exhausting me? And so attentional fatigue is really what many of us, there are plenty of people who labor. There's, I don't even think most of the world is sedentary, but there is the core group, and it might be the podcasting listening group that is more sedentary. But attentionally, what I think everyone has in common is we are attentionally fatigued. The rate of information that we're processing, what we've turned to sort of soothe our nervous systems in these trying times is something that does not take a lot of physicality to bring in, but it takes quite a bit of processing. It's a big sensory input. So imagine, if you're eating something, that's often, it's an input, and there's lots of sensation or sensory input, but there's a lot of work to digest what you put in. And so if you were just cramming food in all of the time, you would get tired physically to have to digest it. And we are physically tired because there's no digestive time for the amount of what we're trying to cram into our eyes and our ears. Yeah. And so once you recognize, oh, I am attentionally fatigued, and this walk, while it doesn't seem like it will be so, will actually revive me physically, especially if I unplug, especially if I just have a light chat with a friend, if I just don't go with anybody and just don't say anything, and I, do a sensory meditation and listen for birds, that, or anything else. It could be running for people, cycling. Usually anytime you can get yourself in a state where you're in flow, walking is such a good place. Like walking is, I think that's why many of us are doing it, is because it's getting us into a state of, you get into something where you can sort of check out. It's like scrolling, right? The movements are very repetitive. So you don't have to think about it. It's that
comforting.
Much. Yeah. It's outside. There's all these things that are happening. And so it calms you. So you are resting by being physically active. And so I have a few ways of helping people work out. Like, what are the ways that you can, take down some of those pieces? And then what are the other, for some people might be dancing, might be swimming, might be knitting. Knitting is another self-soothing movement. It's on that movement macro pyramid. So letting yourself engage with this and say, oh, I am actually moving these fine motor, crafting, long ancestral skills, nourishing these parts and resting my mind, at the same time.
I love that. Yeah, I've always sort of described walking as active rest. That there's something about it that is so, to use your beautiful language, it's so nourishing. It's incredibly restful. For me, has incredible comfort built into it. But I think your point about, feeling exhausted, it's that emotional exhaustion that we then mistake as physical exhaustion, when actually going for the walk is the most nourishing thing we can do. But that delineation and that understanding, that really clarifying what kind of energy you're lacking. It's potentially not physical. It is emotional. And then the most nourishing thing we can do to fill up is go for a walk. I so feel that. The other thing I thought about your book that was really, really powerful and really important is the concept, and we've touched on this a little bit, but it's almost as if the micronutrients, the smallest gestures, the thing that don't feel like a heavy lift, often have the biggest impact. And that's not a place where many of us, especially if it comes to movement or exercise, and I don't think of the walk as a workout or necessarily exercise, and maybe that's the shift, but this notion, you beautifully articulate that it is often in these subtle shifts. It is in the notion of potentially carrying something where we see sort of, I'll call it the biggest impact. It's, and I think it's maybe the biggest impact because it's been missing for so long. We think, so say more about that. I think you do such a beautiful job at highlighting how these small gestures, these micronutrients, are perhaps the most nutritious and most important in many ways.
Well, certainly what's important for us are the things we're not getting.
Yes.
So, if you were missing vitamin D or some other major vitamin, and the thing with nutrients, it's sort of like, once you understand what nutrients are essential compounds that have to be put into the body. But the reason they were deemed nutrients was in hindsight. We saw what happened to
if you didn't have it.
If you didn't have them, and it's very predictable. It's so what you can't, there are many compounds that if you don't get, something will happen to you, but it's that it's predictable, that it's the same across most bodies. And when you reintroduce that, the issue
Right.
goes away or reduces, the symptoms disappear.
Well
so
said.
so it's like filling a hole. It's like filling a leaky bathtub. It's putting that last piece of the puzzle back in. You are literally nourishing a
Yes.
portion of your body, or a flow of a system of your body that was stalling. And so that's,
Yes.
I imagine, like, think of it this way, is like your brain, your mind. It's really tricky, that language, but let's say your mind. Well, your brain is overseeing this coordination, and your mind is sort of perceiving it, this
Right.
overall coordination. And here's this thing that you haven't been getting, and your mind sort of normalizes it because it's got to go day to day. It can't sit
Right.
and ruminate
Yes.
about these things. But your brain is sort of like, we don't have a big language for movement deficit. We have language for hunger pains.
Hunger pain.
And we
Right.
have a way of relating the way we feel emotionally and physically to this active eating. We teach our children, you're not hungry, you're bored. You're
That's so
really
true.
angry. Oh, this is the way undernourishment is showing up in this moment.
Right.
And we
Right.
decipher.
You're hangry. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
hangry, right? We've got this language.
Yeah.
Or I can physically feel my stomach rumbling.
Yeah.
I know what it feels like to be pregnant and needing a meal, or had been hiking or racing for much too long, and needing to put something in. I'm hitting a physical wall. There's an interpretation. What is the word I'm trying to think of? Like, we are not fluent in the language of the way
Right.
our bodies communicate with us, and so, because movement is off our radar is something we really need. We are in a sedentary culture overall. Doesn't mean all the bodies are sedentary, but our
course.
way of understanding, it's like, it's perfectly fine to sit down almost all of the day and do no physical movements at all. And that's plenty normalized.
Yes.
That when you get this missing piece, this
Yes.
small,
Has a profound impact.
for your brain,
Yes.
everything relaxes.
Yeah.
Or
Right.
or the pain signal goes away because it was trying to
Right.
communicate to you. Like, we're not used to thinking of pain as just our way of the body indicating to us, like, this isn't working for me. Have your plantar fasciitis write you a letter, and
That's so great. Right.
you tune into it, and it's like,
Right.
what are you
Listen.
saying? Like,
Right.
a lot of times there's a wisdom, there's an ability to read, but we're not at that level or that practice. I want folks to be in. I do my part to help people get to that state. So
That's so
they're-
beautiful. Yeah.
they're impactful because they are literal nutrients. And then the other part of the small stuff is, I do think we're very used to thinking of exercise in lieu of we use movement and exercise interchangeably, but they're different.
They're different.
And we also look at large hunks of time as valuable and minutes as expendable. They're pennies. They're
That's
coins.
so true.
And we just
That's so
toss them
true.
away. We'll leave them on the floor. And if it's not a
Right.
$100 bill, I'm not even going to bend over and pick it up.
Right. Right.
And we are not used to looking for the minutes. And so we piddle the minutes away and yet lament that we have no time. But meanwhile, if you look at your online tracker on your phone,
Right.
you piddled away 57 minutes.
Right.
Now, you didn't have a block of 57 minutes, but you didn't see that you sat in the car for 11 minutes waiting for pickup, and you could have got out and walked around the block. Or you could have parked and walked in to do that one errand. We're so used to not doing that. So looking for the minutes is impactful because they add up. Hours are just minutes. 3 hours are just minutes. So we've got to start looking for the minutes.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for that. One of the things I was going to ask you, or what were some of the things that these walk stars that potentially listening could think about, and that's it, which is, look for those minutes. We don't have to go for a 5-mile walk. We can go for several 2-minute walks.
Yeah.
And all of that is impactful and important. The other thing that I think is so powerful is the understanding the distinction between movement and exercise, and really super powerful. Well, I could talk to you all day. And can we go for a walk sometime together?
Absolutely.
Up the whole coast. Tell the walk stars where they can find you, the name of this beautiful new book, the best place to see all of your beautiful work.
Nutritious Movement is the overarching everything. So you can find the website
My
there.
favorite. So good.
It's big. And then
It's so good.
that's on social. And I have a Move Your DNA podcast, and we cover a lot of walking mechanics. So if you're interested in drilling down, like, what do walking poles do for my body when I'm using them? What are gaits that I like? What are changes that I can make? And what are ways that I can weave walking into the non-leisure domains of my life? There's a lot of that because I'm just a walker. Walking is so central to who I am, and also how I dealt with my foot injury. Being a walker, when I fractured something in my foot, how did I deal with it?
I love that last podcast on walking poles. That was, so everybody go check that out. It's a really great episode and changed the way I thought about it. So thank you. Well, I love this conversation, and I know you and I both love walking and think it is a place for an extraordinary amount of learning about ourselves and potentially the people we're walking with and this planet. So, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope we do get to walk together sometime. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me. I would love to sometime.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This Morning Walk is a production of Blind Nil Audio, hosted by me, Alex L.
And me, Libby Delana. Produced and edited by Chris Jacobs.
If you find value and meaning in the conversations that Libby and I have, please share the show with a friend and consider leaving a 5-star review. Comments on Apple Podcasts really help us out. When you do that, it introduces this show to a bigger audience. Thank you so much for listening.
You are wonderful. Have a great walk.
The views, information, or opinions expressed in this series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Chip and Joanna Gaines, Blind Nil Audio, nor Magnolia.